Straight line quilting is easily accomplished with a walking foot on a standard sewing machine, but to make more organic or curved shapes, it's much easier to use a free motion quilting foot, and that's what we're doing in this episode of How to Quilt. When I first got into quilting, it really was some of the more modern quilts that attracted me. The Modern Quilt Guild was a huge influence, and a lot of the people who are making quilts through local modern quilt guilds inspired me endlessly with their vision, with their ability to use negative space, with the colors and palettes they were bringing to their quilting, but also with something I had never seen before, and that was free motion quilting. The idea that I could draw on fabric with my thread and then take that and apply it to a quilt was a game changer for me, and I'm really excited at the idea that I get to share that with you today. I'm not going to use my walking foot for free motion quilting. I'm going to use a different presser foot that looks like this. It has a hole on the bottom, and when it's installed, it will float above the level of the fabric. So it doesn't actually squeeze the fabric. It just floats above it to contain the needle. I do need to bring my thread under the presser foot so it doesn't get tangled, and make sure that my bobbin is up. And then I need to lower my feed dogs. On this particular machine, this is the feed dog lever. And when I engage it, it lowers the feed dogs on my machine so that when I operate the needle, they don't engage. So if this presser foot is floating above the fabric and the feed dogs are disengaged, the fabric can move freely beneath the needle. On other machines like this one, at the back of the machine and behind, we can disengage our feed dogs using a little lever like this. So this is feed dogs engaged, this is feed dogs disengaged. You just have to remember to put it back when you're done. I'm going to lower my needle into my fabric. And I'm starting in the middle, but normally I would start on an edge. And lower my presser foot, which is holding things but not really squeezing them. And then I just stitch. See that thread get stuck? I'll pull that out. I don't want to trim it. I just want to remove it because I'm going to use it later. From there, I can draw sort of any shape I want. Some people call this thread drawing. You can write names. I want you to watch out for this. This feathering sort of look generally means that there's something squirrely with the tension in your machine, and it's worth taking a break to check that tension to get better stitch quality. One of the things you want to be exceptionally mindful of as you are doing free motion quilting is the tension on your thread. Because of the way the needle is moving through the fabric, there are plenty of occasions where the tension can get off, where even the upper thread can come out of the tension lever in the machine, in which case you end up with a nest underneath your quilt. So in the same way that in the How to Quilt episode on foundation paper piecing, I indicated that not only should you be prepared that you might need to use your seam ripper, you should assume that you're going to need your seam ripper. That is also the case with free motion quilting, definitely while you are still learning. Be prepared that there are times where with the quilting stitches, just like any other sewing, you're just going to need to take those stitches out and do them over. And rather than thinking of that as, I screwed up, I made a mistake, think of it instead as no harm, no foul. Once those stitches go in, they can just as easily come out without damaging your patchwork in any way. So if you end up having trouble with your tension while you're doing free motion stitching, don't give up. Take those stitches out and give it another shot. And see if you can take your top thread all the way off and rethread your machine. Take your bobbin thread all the way out, rethread the bobbin, bring it back up, and then begin again. I would ballpark that somewhere 96% of problems people have with free motion sewing come down to either they're inconsistent with their speed on the presser foot, or they're having tension issues with their thread. Both of those are things we can fix. So let's begin again the way I ordinarily would if I were free motion quilting. I'm going to start in the backing and tuck everything else under and then hit my presser foot. The key here is consistent speed on the presser foot. We're not speeding up or slowing down. We're not in a hurry. This isn't a race. Taking our time and making shapes. Free motion stitching is great because it can be used to fill in borders and sashing in places where you don't really know what else to do. The threads can cross one another or intersect. I can tell you that popping sound makes me think I should definitely change my needle if I'm going to quilt a full project. This needle sounds tired, and I rethreaded my machine, but I'm still seeing a little bit of that feathering, that tooth look. So I'm going to slow down, but I should probably also change my needle. That's good advice for everybody. Angela Walters is one of the greats of free motion quilting, and she likes to say she quilts it till it's dead, meaning that she puts her stitches, quilting stitches, very, very close to one another. So you can quilt thickly or thinly. You can also stop in place with your needle down, take out your pins as you go, and then pick right up where you left off. One of the things that's nice about free motion stitching is you can start at the edge of a block inside the sashing and do a completely different design for each block of the quilt. And since we've already done a sampler quilt, if you want to do sampled quilting and try out different quilting stitches as befits the design of each block, go to town. Where else are you going to do that besides a sampler quilt? Think of the historic cross-stitch samplers that we all have seen at different museums over the years. And that's entirely what they were learning to do, was different stitches in different circumstances. So we can do loop-the-loops. I'm going to move this out of the way. For a while it was very popular in free motion quilting to do what's called bubbles, where you sort of, it's more than even a loop-the-loop, you just sort of make little circles, and they don't have to be perfect circles. They are definitely circular shaped, and you can do little bubbles all over. What's nice about this design is that you can come back on yourself and fill in gaps until you get a really satisfying level of quilting in a particular portion of the quilt. You can do larger feathery shapes, like seaweed or algae. You can do text, as you've seen. I have one that I made with Tony Danza on it. and I got to meet Mr. Danza and show him the quilt. And all the quilting stitches were the lyrics to Who's the Boss. And I'm pretty sure he enjoyed that a lot. I know I did. Free motion quilting can be super meditative. It can be as complicated or as time consuming as you want it to be. You can see I'm just sort of messing around, having fun, filling in areas. You could go side to side, all the way down a border, or all the way down a section of sashing. With these little zigzaggy shapes. Or you could outline something. Or you could go back inside a shape. Point being that free motion stitching feels very organic. It can have these nice curvilinear shapes that are super satisfying to look at. It gives you a lot more options than straight line quilting. It does take time to master, so be patient with yourself. The organic nature of the shapes that we can make with free motion quilting really can be enormously inspiring on the body of your quilt. So as you're looking at your own How to Quilt sampler, think through whether you want to use different quilting techniques in different blocks. One technique in the sashing and another in the border. There are lots of very traditional quilts online where you can look at the ways in which they've been quilting and recognize that you don't have to commit to a single technique. This quilt is a sampler, and if you'd like to use it as a quilting sampler in addition to a patchwork sampler, you can absolutely do that. You can do one version of quilting in the borders, another in the sashing between the blocks, and different ones in each of the blocks themselves. Or you can simply draw diagonal lines with the 60-degree indicator on your clear acrylic ruler, stitch straight across the whole thing in diamonds, and call it a day. Either way, I hope you have such a good time installing the quilting stitches on your quilt, because after this, we're going to put the binding on in the next episode of How to Quilt.